Welcome to Commentary Companions. I'm your host, Tony Garcia, and here's another podcast idea. This was a podcast idea that I had been teasing on YouTube even before my podcast episode regarding the essential Steven Spielberg movies. And it is a question that's part of the thumbnail. What if Disney traded the Muppets to Sony in exchange for the movie rights to Spider-Man? Well, specifically, the Spider-Man franchise. This was an idea that I had thought of even when I had done my last video of 2024. That video being, Sony's Spider-Man universe is dead. Now what? Because I thought to myself, well, with yet another failed cinematic universe for Sony Pictures, their options and future for Spider-Man seem mixed at best. On the one hand, we're going to get Spider-Man Brand New Day in 2026. That is guaranteed. And we're going to get Spider-Man Noir. So those seem like potentially good futures for them. Especially once we get the third installment to the Spider-Verse franchise, that film being Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse. But I also just suggested the idea, well, Sony could just sell the rights of Spider-Man to Marvel, but I'm sure Sony would want to make a deal with Disney first. You have to remember, the Walt Disney Company is willing to buy anything, especially if it means making more money for Marvel Studios, because we saw how Disney went out of their way to purchase 21st Century Fox for $71 billion, just so that they could have the rights to the X-Men and the Fantastic Four. Although, if you want my humble opinion, I do think purchasing the rights to X-Men and Fantastic Four from Fox probably would have been a lot cheaper. Like, I can imagine it would probably only cost them, I would wager, maybe $10 or $20 billion, which probably would have saved them $50 billion more. But that's my humble opinion. You never know. But the way I see it, maybe Disney wants to still purchase the rights to Spider-Man from Sony, because as far as we're concerned, in this convoluted table, Disney does own some of the rights to Spider-Man. They legally have the rights to produce a television show for Spider-Man, which is why we haven't gotten a follow-up to The Spectacular Spider-Man lately. However, it's like Disney has the TV rights to Spider-Man, but they can't do an animated movie about Spectacular Spider-Man, as Sony would be allowed to do that. It's complicated, but it's funny how Sony does Spider-Man in animation better than that. And I'm thinking, if Disney wanted to purchase the rights to Spider-Man, how much would it cost? And if Disney didn't want to spend any money regarding the franchise, what would they have to offer to Sony for a trade-in? Maybe they could trade one of their contractually obligated actors and give it to Sony. Now, of course, and then I thought, well, there is one franchise that Disney hasn't used in a while and hasn't had much regard for. That franchise being the Muppets. I mean, the Muppets has been part of the Walt Disney Company since 2004. I'd always assumed that they were part of Disney since 2006, but I was 2 years off. Yes, indeed. On February 17th, 2004, the Walt Disney Company bought the Muppets franchise from the Jim Henson Company for $75 million. They've been part of Disney's family for over 20 years. A sentence I never thought I would be saying. Here I am, a 29-year-old, saying that the Muppets have been part of the Disney libraries for 21 years. It's insane. But, back back when Disney bought the Muppets, this was back when Michael Eisner was Disney's CEO and had much more enthusiasm for the Muppets. In fact, when Michael Eisner was working for ABC, he knew Jim Henson. Which is kind of funny. I mean, if I had a nickel for every time someone who used to work for ABC became the CEO of Disney, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's strange that it's happened twice. I mean, the funny thing is, yeah, it's like Mike Eisner worked for ABC, and then like Bob Iger worked for ABC. Insane, right? Of course, Bob Chapek, who was the other CEO of Disney, never worked for ABC, but ironically, he did oversee ABC when he got promoted to CEO before stepping down. Ironic, isn't it? But yeah, like I was saying, when Bob Iger became CEO of Disney, he didn't really have much enthusiasm for the Muppets franchise. He's hardly used it. In fact, this has become apparent because recently Walt Disney World took down Muppet Vision 3D, which was a Disney World attraction that opened up in 1991 after Jim Henson's death. I've never gone to Walt Disney World, and it's a shame that I'm never going to experience Muppet Vision 3D. Plus, it was notable for featuring Mickey Mouse, with the late Wayne Allwine providing his voice. It would be kind of cool if Disney uploaded Muppet Vision 3D on YouTube. I mean, it wouldn't be strange. I mean, I could be wrong, but maybe Disney has been notable for uploading simulations of their Disneyland and Disney World attractions on YouTube, which I think is kind of cool. In fact, I'm kind of surprised Disney hasn't invested in the idea of like VR rides of their Disneyland rides. That would make a lot of money. But anyway, back to the subject. The Walt Disney Company, since under Bob Iger's rule, hasn't really used the Muppets that often. I mean, yeah, they'll do a movie and sometimes a Disney Plus special, but they haven't really shown much favor to the Muppets. It's often the most overlooked, especially after with Marvel and Star Wars. And I figured, well, maybe Disney could offer the Muppets to Sony in exchange for the rights to Spider-Man. It could seem like a good trade-in. Now, of course, this wouldn't be the first time that the Walt Disney Company has had to offer a trade-in to a studio to gain the rights to something. And this is kind of an interesting story. And to tell you this story, we have to go way back to nearly 100 years ago, to before Walt Disney created Mickey Mouse with Ub Iwerks. Here's that story that I'm about to tell you. It's a doozy. Now, back when Walt Disney and his brother Roy were running the company as a humble animation studio, they got their start doing this series of animated shorts known as the Alice cartoon comedies, which was basically Walt Disney's interpretation of Alice in Wonderland. It had a live-action actress surrounded by cartoon characters, which is a very ambitious idea. They are certainly essential to the Disney legacy. 16 of those shorts are sadly lost, allegedly, but now, since they were from the 1920s, they're now in the public domain. And after the success of the Alice comedies, the main producer of these shorts, Margaret J. Winkler, her husband was Charles Mintz, and Charles Mintz was an employee of Universal Studios. Now, Universal had pretty much started their own animation studio, and they wanted to create a new series of animated shorts. So they asked Charles Mintz, "Hey, can you get someone to help us make a new series of animated shorts?" And given that Charles Mintz's wife, Margaret J. Winkler, knew Walt Disney and Ub Iwerks, He pretty much then approached Disney and commissioned him and Ub Iwerks to create a brand new series of shorts for Universal. And so Walt and Ub collaborated and created this character known as Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, which was an anthropomorphic rabbit who got into all sorts of whimsical and silly adventures. So Walt and Ub created the short, created Oswald and Universal distributed these shorts. And Oswald became a big hit for Universal. Now, this was great, Oswald was popular for Universal. He was kind of a household name in the 1920s at the time. But of course, there was a lot of behind-the-scenes drama when making Oswald. I mean, what successful cartoon doesn't have drama, But yeah, Walt wanted a raise. What he didn't know was that Charles Mintz was pretty much buying out Disney's employees behind his back. And Walt was starting to butt heads with Charles over disagreements. Mainly, Walt wanted a raise, and Charles didn't want to give Walt a raise. Given this money issue, Walt threatened to leave Universal and take Oswald with him. But once he found out that now his animators worked for Charles now, and Universal had the rights to Oswald, there was nothing Walt could do. And so Walt left Universal without Oswald, leaving him in the dust and trying to think of a way to create a new cartoon. Ub eventually left Universal and went with Disney, which is hilariously ironic because nearly 40 years later, Ub would come back to Universal to help work on The Birds, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. As Palpatine said, it's ironic. But yeah, Walt and Ub were wondering what to do, and they ended up creating Mickey Mouse. Fun fact, before going with Mickey, Walt was very close to calling this cartoon mouse Mortimer, but Walt's wife Lillian hated that name. She thought Mortimer sounded too pompous, and thank God for Lillian for suggesting something like Mickey. Thank God for her. Although maybe, could you imagine if Walt was talking to Lillian about calling him Mortimer, and she hated Mortimer? It's like, what if we called him Morty Mouse? I'm sure Lily would have been like, bleh, Walt, that is awful. You can do better than Morty Mouse. Maybe you're right. But anyway, Mickey Mouse wasn't exactly an overnight sensation. It didn't, Steamboat Willie wasn't instant like that. There were two other Mickey Mouse shorts. The first official was a short called Plain Crazy, which was actually a silent short. Steamboat Willie was released in 1928, becoming the first cartoon to feature sound. This was right after Warner Brothers released The Jazz Singer, which was notable for being the first movie with legitimate sound. So it felt like perfect timing, and Steamboat Willie became such a sensation that it put Disney on the map. Mickey Mouse became one of the most popular characters. He became so popular that Charles Mintz actually reached out to Walt Disney, offering him a chance to come back to Universal and to take Mickey with him. He wanted Mickey to be part of the Oswald franchise. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, Mickey and Oswald being a cartoon duo at the time, he just wanted to make sure Oswald remained successful and popular, but Disney didn't want to rely on Universal and Charles Mintz. He wanted to remain independent, so he declined Charles Mintz's offer to come back to Universal. And so, Mickey Mouse ended up overshadowing Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. And I think the final nail in the coffin for Oswald was when Universal produced Woody Woodpecker. Woody Woodpecker ended up overshadowing Oswald, and he ended up fading into obscurity after that. And you would think Universal would feature Oswald the Lucky Rabbit alongside Woody Woodpecker in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It probably would have been a very full circle moment, but Then again, in 1947, which is when Who Framed Roger Rabbit took place, Oswald had faded into obscurity, and Woody Woodpecker was popular in 1947, so of course it makes sense that Oswald wouldn't make an appearance. But it probably would have been funny if Oswald did make a non-speaking cameo appearance in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But yeah, after that, Oswald had faded into obscurity. The only time Oswald was ever acknowledged was by cartoon historians. He was definitely important to the Disney legacy. And when Bob Iger started working for Disney, he had wanted to bring Oswald back to the Disney Library, as he was an essential part of the Walt Disney Library. So Bob and the Walt Disney Company were trying to make a deal with Universal for years to see if they could get Oswald back with Disney, and also to purchase the Oswald shorts that Walt had produced for Universal. And so what they did was, the Walt Disney Company and NBC Universal made negotiations. It's like Disney would give ABC sports commentator Al Michaels to NBC Universal, in exchange for NBC Universal giving Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, along with the Disney shorts, to the Walt Disney Company. And that's what happened in 2006. And it's like Oswald ended up being owned by, and the 27 original shorts were owned by Disney, and Al Michaels became a sports commentator for NBC Sports, which is owned by NBC Universal. And which is great. Although, ironically, Universal does own some of the Oswald shorts that they had produced without Disney. You can even find them in several Woody Woodpecker DVD shorts collections. In fact, I think Oswald might have been mentioned in a documentary about Walter Lantz. I'm not sure, but I do know that the Walter Lantz documentary was written and produced by Spider-Man the Animated Series creator John Semper Jr. John, if you're listening to this, hi. But anyway, it is kind of funny. I mean, it's funny. It's like Disney, Marvel, and the Muppets are also connected with Columbia Pictures and Universal. But I think that's getting off subject. But that's my point. Disney has done trade-ins before with other studios for negotiations. And why would the Muppets fit in with Sony Pictures / Columbia Pictures? Well, so it's like the Muppets and have had quite a relationship with Columbia Pictures and their owner Sony Pictures before. It's even when Jim Henson was alive, it's like Jim and the Muppets had quite a relationship with Columbia Pictures before. When he was alive, Jim Henson had quite a good relationship with TriStar Pictures, the subsidiary of Columbia Pictures, and Sony. TriStar distributed The Muppets Take Manhattan and Labyrinth, starring David Bowie. And, well, to this day, Sony Pictures, the owners of TriStar, still own the rights to The Muppets Take Manhattan. However, they don't own the distribution rights to Labyrinth. Now Labyrinth is being distributed by Shout Studios. I should probably get Labyrinth on DVD. But anyway, after his untimely death in 1990, 5 years later, Jim Henson's children, Brian and Lisa, made a deal with Columbia TriStar in which their home video market, which would later be known as Sony Pictures Entertainment, would distribute all forms of Muppet-related media, including every season of The Muppet Show, The Muppet Movie and The Great Muppet Caper, so the first two theatrical Muppet movies, several Muppet specials, and a lot of the episodes of Bear in the Big Blue House, and recently, Fraggle Rock. I remember this well of Columbia's TriStar pretty much distributing many of these Muppet-related medias, including The Dark Crystal and Storyteller. it's kind of, I mean, it was kind of jarring seeing Sony distribute the Dark Crystal. I thought that the Dark Crystal was distributed by Columbia, and only to find the classic Universal logo on it. It's very jarring, but yeah, Jim Henson also had quite a relationship with Universal as well. Universal distributed The Great Muppet Caper and The Dark Crystal in the US, and they handled the US distribution rights to the theatrical re-releases of the Muppet movie. After Jim Henson's death, Universal distributed the 2000 comedy Rat for the Jim Henson Company, and It's a Very Muppet Christmas Movie. And to this day, Universal still owns the rights to It's a Very Muppet Christmas Movie. But yeah, I also remember Columbia TriStar distributing episodes to Bear in the Big Blue House. In fact, I used to own a video cassette of Bear in the Big Blue House. It was the potty training episode. But yeah, I have such fond memories of Bear in the Big Blue House. In fact, Bear in the Big Blue House was the reason I became familiar with Jim Henson and the Muppets. In fact, Sony's imprint, Sony Wonder, distributed many Sesame Street videos from 1995 all the way to 2007. Like I said, the Muppets, whether it be with Jim Henson's Muppets or Sesame Street, they've had quite a relationship with Sony Pictures Entertainment. Alongside doing home entertainment distributions for Muppet-related products of the past, Sony and the Jim Henson Company created a joint venture company known as Jim Henson Pictures in 1995. It was meant to create new Muppet projects. The Jim Henson Company would produce these movies, while one of Sony's companies, like Columbia, would distribute. In fact, sometimes Sony would help with filming. Together, Sony and the Jim Henson Company, well, specifically Jim Henson Pictures, only made 3 projects that were theatrically released. Those films were Buddy, which was about a monkey, Muppets from Space, and The Adventures of Elmo in Grouchland. They made one straight-to-video movie known as Kermit's Swamp Years in 2002. And a fun fact about Adventures of Elmo in Grouchland. When they were filming that film, Sony provided one of their sound stages to recreate Sesame Street to make it much easier for the puppeteers to operate the Sesame Street characters, which is kind of cool. Sadly, Sony's relationship with the Jim Henson Company ended in 2004. And of course, this coincidentally came right as Disney purchased the Muppets. For many years, the Walt Disney Company had been trying to buy the Muppets from Jim. Henson actually died on the weekend he would have sold the Muppets to Disney because they had quite an interesting relationship, what with Michael Eisner, and, Disney even made several projects with Jim. In fact, one of Jim's last projects before he died was a special in which the Muppets visit Walt Disney World. And one of Jim's last TV appearances that he did before his death was a promo of the Muppets visit Walt Disney World on the Arsenio Hall show. It's a bittersweet to kind of see Jim interact with Arsenio. But yeah, that's actually also, I'm going to admit that Jim Henson appearance is why I'm familiar with Arsenio Hall. It isn't Coming to America that made me familiar with Arsenio Hall. It was that Jim Henson appearance. But like I said, on February 14th, Disney bought the Muppets from the Jim Henson Company for $75 million. And with that, they also bought the rights to Bear in the Big Blue House. But despite Disney owning the Muppets, Sony still owns the distribution rights to The Muppets Take Manhattan, Muppets from Space, and Kermit's Swamp Years. And while the classic films like The Muppet Movie, Great Muppet Caper, Muppet Christmas Carol, and Muppet Treasure Island are available to watch on Disney+, Take Manhattan, Muppets from Space, and Kermit's Swamp Years are unavailable on Disney+, ironically. But of course, that could be subject to change at any moment as of December 6th, 2025. Remember that. I have to mention the date because if I just say, oh yeah, these films I mentioned are unavailable on Disney Plus, and then the next day, oh, they're available on Disney Plus, I have to say, this could be subject to change as of this upload on December 6th, 2025. Now, on the other side of the coin, let's talk about the history. I've mentioned Spider-Man's history in cinema in my Commentary Companions episode to the 2002 Spider-Man movie. Now, in 1999, Marvel sold the movie rights to Spider-Man to Sony Pictures Entertainment in 1999 in a desperate bid to get out of bankruptcy. Thankfully, Blade was able to prove a monumental success. And it showed that an alternate superhero could be taken seriously and could work. But yeah, Sony had the rights to Spider-Man since 1999. Sony was even offered a chance to buy the movie rights to all the Marvel characters, but they turned that down because they were more interested in Spider-Man. But they did have the rights to several other obscure characters that I might mention later. I might mention what other characters Columbia Pictures had the rights to when I do my Commentary Companions episode about Ghost Rider starring Nicolas Cage. Not today, of course, but tomorrow. But if I'm correct, I believe that my Commentary Companions episode of Ghost Rider will occur after my Commentary Companions episode to X-Men The Last Stand. Just you wait, and I promise I will get that commentary episode of X-Men 3 uploaded soon. I apologize for my procrastination. But, yes, I intend to do it. But anyway, I'm getting off subject. But yeah, Sony has the right, had ended up purchasing the rights to Spider-Man. And they've had the rights since 1999. Spider-Man has been kind of a cash cow for Sony. Why else do you think Sony re-releases their past Spider-Man movies every now and then? I feel like an idiot for not watching them in theaters every now and then. I do want to see them, but they're on days in which I'm working, which is so peevish. It cheeses me off. But anyway, on August 31st, 2009, the Walt Disney Company bought Marvel Entertainment for $4 billion, giving Disney the rights to over 5,000 characters from the Marvel library. But this also affected several things. This also meant they could produce their own TV shows, with Spider-Man, of course, if they wanted to. But it also affected the Spectacular Spider-Man and caused the Spectacular Spider-Man to be canceled. I don't fully understand why they can't just, do a continuation. Maybe they could, maybe Disney and Sony could join forces to revive the Spectacular Spider-Man. But, that's Disney's decision. Now, of course, Disney has kind of neglected the Muppets franchise, despite creating new content. In fact, the first content that Disney made with the Muppets was the Muppets Wizard of Oz. And then in 2011, we got the 2011 Muppets movie starring Jason Segel and Amy Adams. I hope I'm pronouncing Jason Segel's name correctly. I think it's pronounced Segel. Is it pronounced Segal? Nah, it's probably not pronounced Segal. It's probably Jason Segel, but you get the point. The Muppets 2011 proved to be very successful, and a sequel was immediately made, that film being The Muppets Most Wanted, which was also one of the first collaborations with Muppeteer Matt Vogel. And after the success of Muppets Most Wanted, ABC immediately ordered a brand new TV show, that show being The Muppets, which was a mockumentary sitcom. I remember watching it on ABC quite well. I thought it was good. Sadly, the show only lasted one season, and ABC immediately canceled it, not renewing it for a second season. After that, the Muppets just floated around, and then Steve Whitmire, who had voiced Kermit the Frog since Muppet Christmas Carol was let go and replaced by Matt Vogel. And then when Disney Plus was released, they immediately made The Muppets Now, which was kind of a vlog sitcom. Then they also did a Haunted Mansion crossover, and also a spin-off about Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem. And of course, because of Disney Plus, a lot of the theatrical Muppet films that I mentioned, with the exceptions of the others I mentioned that are owned by Sony, they're available on Disney Plus. Now I think to myself, if Disney traded the Muppets in exchange for Spider-Man, what would happen? Well, Sony would then have the rights to the Muppets moving forward. And any future Muppets projects would be produced and distributed by Sony. Now, there's a high likelihood that the new guys at Sony Pictures Entertainment would try to maintain a good relationship with the Jim Henson Company. Maybe they could have invited Brian Henson and his family to come to work for them and have creative control for the Muppets. Because they figured, well, we might not know the best when it comes to the Muppets. The past CEOs probably knew what they were doing when it came to Jim Henson Pictures, and so they would probably offer Brian and Lisa creative control. Maybe they could bring in Frank Oz to help. Who knows? But, yeah, there's a very high likelihood that Sony would they would have the rights to the Muppets, and if they wanted to, they could produce their own Muppet-related movies from Sony. Of course, what they would produce, I'm not sure. But maybe they'd have more interest in creating more projects instead of Disney. Maybe Sony might treat the Muppets with more respect. Now, as for streaming, that would be a different story because, well, what would happen to the Muppet movies on Disney Plus? And another question is, would Sony also have the rights to some of the Muppet movies that Disney produced, such as Muppet Christmas Carol and Muppets 2011? Would they own the rights to that? And actually, there's one other question. When it comes to streaming, would Sony make a deal with Disney Plus to allow said Muppet movies to remain on Disney Plus? And would they also allow Disney to have Muppets Take Manhattan and Muppets from Space be available to stream on Disney Plus? And this is I'm talking about this right as Netflix is about to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery, which really does make me question the future of streaming. If Sony purchased the rights to the Muppets, what would be their new streaming home? Would they make a deal? Would they allow Netflix? Would they say to Netflix, hey, do you want to pretty much stream our Muppet property? And would Netflix say yes? Or would they try to make a deal with a company like Peacock or Hulu or maybe Starz themselves or Amazon? I'm unsure. I mean, the one thing is for certain. If Disney pretty much traded the Muppets for Spider-Man, Disney would then have the movie rights to the Spider-Man franchise. Whether they would have distribution rights to the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, I'm not sure. But Disney would then have full creative control of the Spider-Man franchise, and Sony would have absolutely no interest, would have absolutely no control in any Spider-Man movies. And they probably wouldn't try to create yet another competing Spider-Man universe that is failing to compete with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, I could see Disney treating Spider-Man with more respect, and I think it would be less of a burden on Tom Holland and the other actors. But of course, if that happened, well, maybe Sony would still be obligated to distribute Spider-Man Brand New Day and Beyond the Spider-Verse. But after that, once those obligations are fulfilled, then by 2030, Disney would have full creative control for Spider-Man and could do whatever the heck they wanted. They could even do their own symbiote stories if they wanted to. The possibilities would be endless for Disney, because maybe Disney could do team-up movies for Spider-Man without the influence of Sony. And, well, I think there's a high likelihood that Disney would also ignore Sony's Spider-Man universe and just maybe pass it off as a tax write-off. I don't really know. The future would be very mixed, but bright side, Spider-Man would fully be part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Sony would have a lot to work with the Muppets. I could see if Sony owned the rights to the Muppets, I could see them doing DVD releases that collect their Sony-produced films, maybe call it a Jim Henson collection. It'd be kind of funny seeing Muppets Take Manhattan with Labyrinth and Sony's recently produced Muppets movie. It would be weird, but it would be kind of funny, but it would also be kind of amusing at the same time. And whether they would also have the rights to the Muppet movie and the Great Muppet Caper, I'm not sure. Maybe it could happen, maybe not. I'm not sure. Could Disney trading the Muppets for the rights to Spider-Man be a good thing? Could it work? Maybe it could. Maybe it might blow up in their faces. Maybe Disney doesn't even have an interest to give the Muppets to Sony and just wants to... Well, let's hope that Disney doesn't try to purchase Sony Pictures Entertainment. That would be way too expensive. I think because, like I said, the Walt Disney Company could have saved $50 billion more if they had just made a negotiation deal with Fox to just buy the rights to X-Men and Fantastic Four, because I don't think they really needed to purchase the entire studio. Because it's still weird seeing The Simpsons on Disney+. Really weird. But there's one bright spot to the whole Disney buying Fox. I mean, they've been able to produce the Predator franchise, and they've done a really great job with Predator so far. I really do like Prey and Predator Badlands and Killer of Killers and the Predator comics that Marvel has made. They're really good. But yeah, that is definitely a bright spot. Disney buying the Predator franchise, buying Fox, has been a major benefit for the Predator franchise because they gave us Dan Trachtenberg, who has done an amazing job with the Predator franchise. Here I am talking about Muppets, Marvel, and Predator. Oh my! But, yeah, I really do hope that Disney and Sony can come to an agreement that could result in Spider-Man coming back to the Marvel Cinematic Universe for good this time. Who knows what could happen? As I usually say, everything is always subject to change at any moment. But, I'm actually surprised that this might be one of my shortest Commentary Companions episode. I haven't had shortest review is Hulk vs. Wolverine, and I think this might be the shortest Commentary Companions episode. But yeah, special thanks to my friend Vlado for drawing this commission drawing of Spider-Man and Kermit headed to different buildings. It's a great representation of what could happen if Disney traded the Muppets to Sony for Spider-Man. Do I want such an idea to work? Maybe. I mean, I do love the Muppets. There's no doubt about that. And I definitely want to see them be respected. The Muppets don't deserve to be receiving the short end of the stick. Although it does make me wonder, if Sony owned the rights to the Muppets, what TV station would air them? Because I don't know that many TV stations that are owned by Sony. Actually, let me check. It's interesting how this has happened when It's like, fun fact, Sony purchased Columbia from the Coca-Cola Company in 1989 for $3.4 billion. Does Sony own any... Whoops. Looks like they do, but probably not in the... There's a Sony channel. I've never heard of that. Well, it seems like Sony channel is an Indian television channel. Only available in India. Go figure. But, yeah. Who knows? I mean, maybe if Sony owned the rights to the Muppets, they'd probably be making a deal with ABC anyway to air the Muppets. But who knows? The future could be bright or it could be uncertain. You never know what might happen. But anyway, that was my Commentary Companions podcast episode. What if Disney traded the Muppets in exchange for the rights to Spider-Man from Sony? Is this a terrible idea? Maybe. But I promise you, the next episode is definitely going to be a long one since I'll be doing a commentary episode on X-Men The Last Stand. And boy, do I have a lot to say. I am probably going to be tearing Bryan Singer and Brett Ratner a new one. And maybe the timing is perfect, what with Brett Ratner supposedly returning to make Rush Hour 4. I mean, but with Netflix purchasing Warner Brothers Discovery, is Rush Hour 4 still going to happen? And is Rush Hour 4 going to still be distributed by Paramount? I mean, things could be subject to change. Maybe maybe Rush Hour 4 might end up being the first New Line Cinema movie to be made since Netflix purchased Warner Brothers Discovery. And maybe Netflix themselves may end up distributing Rush Hour 4. I don't really know. I mean, one thing's for certain, I'm sure Donald Trump is probably throwing a temper tantrum knowing that Paramount isn't going to be buying Warner Brothers. Honestly, I never wanted Paramount to purchase Warner Brothers. They work better as separate entities, in my opinion. But that's a can of worms I'd rather not open. But thank you for listening to my Commentary Companions podcast episode. Sorry that it wasn't as long as the Essential Steven Spielberg movies list. But who knows? I hope I can do essential movies from other directors that I appreciate and like. I should really write them down. And I really do hope I could maybe do a Commentary Companions episode for Home Alone to celebrate the film's 35th anniversary. But anyway, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Don't have a good day. Have a great day.